I know, because I'm short. I know. Oh, you want to put him back in? No, actually, cover me. Just kidding. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Well, sisters, I'm grateful to be here today, and I'm grateful that you've chosen to come to this class because there's a lot of other good classes that we have, so thank you for being here. Some of you, as I look out, some of you I know, I recognize, and others, I don't know who you are. So it's nice to meet you. My name is Mellissa DePalola, and I am in the Franklin 2nd Ward. And I am just really grateful to be here to share some principles that I try to practice in my own life. I am definitely not perfect. But I have noticed that they have been helpful to me, and they've also been helpful to those that I work with. So just a couple disclaimers before I kind of get into this. I really, really loved our keynote speaker, and one of the things that she said that I loved is that this is a safe place. And so it's okay for you to have all the different thoughts that you're going to have about what I'm going to talk about, and maybe all the different feelings that might come up with what I say. And these principles can be very helpful, but a couple things I just want to point out is these things are things that we will probably spend the rest of our lives trying to do and working on because we're not perfect. And this is not about expecting us to be perfect in implementing some of these things. The other thing that I want to say is these principles can really help about anyone, but if someone is struggling with trauma in their lives or a past abuse or current abuse or struggles with a clinically diagnosable mental health illness, there would be more considerations to take than obviously just what I'm going to talk about today. So I always just want to put that out there. So I've been asked to talk about emotional awareness and intentional living. And basically, if I was to describe it in just one sentence, it would go something like this. It's being aware of and accepting what is out of your personal control and committing to action that improves your life. Now that all sounds really good and packaged up and sounds okay, maybe I can do that. But then when we actually start to apply it, it's not so easy, but it is doable. And that's why I kind of said it can take the rest of our lives to try to work on these principles and implement them. So a little bit about the information I'm going to share. A lot of it is information and training, in-depth training that I received years ago from a man called Russ Harris. And he is one of the leading experts in a type of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And the interesting way that I came about this type of therapy and working with the clients that I work with was, so if I go back to years and years of when I was fresh out of graduate school and being supervised and working with people in therapy, I worked a lot with people with their thoughts because we know that a lot of what that rain that was talked about starts with what's going on in our minds. And I used to work fresh, really new, really eager. I used to help people identify what those thoughts were that were really negative or self-defeating. And I used to help them to kind of stop them and then reframe them to be more balanced and positive. So does that sound familiar to all of you? Is that some things that we kind of hear, popular psychology and out in our society today is we hear of, that's negative thoughts. So let's stop that and let's turn it around to be positive. And there's some value to that. There really is. I'm not saying there's not value, but short term, it works mostly short term. And so what I started to see over the years is that short term working with individuals in therapy is that they would grasp those concepts and they would take it and run with it, and things would be going really good for a while. And then I started to notice that they'd fall back into those same kind of negative thinking patterns. And I wondered about that. I thought, is there something maybe a little bit better that we can do? And that's when I found the acceptance and commitment therapy work and started learning from Russ Harris and and understanding a different type of approach of how we can deal with that rain. How do we deal with all the thoughts and feelings that come to us, all the things that life inevitably just kind of brings at us. Sometimes it throws at us, right? Sometimes it slaps us in the face. So have you ever wondered why, and maybe some of you haven't, but have you ever wondered why sometimes it can be really hard to be happy? So maybe you have a lot of blessings, right? You can see your blessings, and maybe sometimes you feel guilty because, well, I have all these blessings, so why don't I feel good sometimes? And that's because I think there's a lot of myths around what happiness really is, and we get a lot of different messages about that. So I want to share with you just a few myths first about happiness. So the first one is that happiness is the natural state for human beings. Now I'm going to read that again. This is the myth. Happiness is the natural state for human beings, meaning we always are happy. But in reality, what do we know? What has our experience taught us is that it's actually an ever-changing state of emotions. Our emotions are always changing, and that's how we are. So my family and I, we moved here to Tennessee a little bit over 5 years from now, and one of the things that we noticed is the weather here. I'm sure that most of you can relate, but this weather can change on a dime. So being from California originally, it was either sunny or it rained that day. But here, I'm sure all of you have experienced, you could have like sunny in the morning, you can have a storm in the middle of the day, and then maybe the temperature's dropping at night and it's starting to snow, right? So I want you to think that was amazing to us. We always had to be on our toes and make sure that we were prepared for all the different weather. So, but that's how our thoughts and emotions are, always changing. The second myth is happiness means that we're always feeling good. Who wants to feel good? Of course, I'm going to raise my hand. I always want to feel good, right? But in reality, happiness isn't necessarily that we always are living in a constant state of pleasure or content. In reality, we know that happiness is experiencing the full spectrum of thoughts and emotions and having a rich, full, and meaningful life where we're experiencing all of that. I'm not saying that's easy. Okay, but if you look in the scriptures, if you look at the leaders of our church, they have that spectrum of emotions. The last myth I just kind of want to tell you about happiness is that if you're not, this is the message we can sometimes get, if you're not happy, then there's something wrong with you. You must be defective somehow. Okay, I get that a lot. So when I work with people, a lot of times people will come in and that's kind of what they'll think, well, I'm just not happy, so there's something wrong with me. I must be crazy. And oftentimes it's an honor to be able to sit with them and to help them to understand, you can drop that struggle. It's okay. You're not always going to be happy. So I want to show you this. Let's see if I can make this work here. Did it do it? Okay. All right, so let's talk about this. We've got a whole bunch of researchers and people who are experts in the psychological field and feelings and thoughts and emotions. And there is some kind of debate, but these are kind of the 9 basic of emotions that have been studied that we all will experience. And any other emotion that we might experience either comes from one of these or comes from a mixture of them. Okay, so I want you just to take a look at these emotions here. And in your mind, I want you to look at each one and ask yourself, which one is a positive emotion and which one is a negative emotion? And I think that might be different for each one of you, right? Because you've been raised different ways and you've received different messages. But when I look at that, I definitely see maybe 5 or 6 of those, at least the way I was raised, of emotions that aren't good. I shouldn't be feeling those things. Okay, so maybe you're like me a little bit. If you have scriptures or phone, feel free to kind of follow along with me, but we're going to get into scriptures a little bit too, because understanding emotional awareness and attentional living is not just about all academics and psychological advances, but we have to tap into the scriptures too, where we really know that the pure source of truth is. So I want to read a scripture in 2 Nephi. This is chapter 2, verse 23. And this is talking about Adam and Eve. And it's a familiar one, but it says, "And they would have had no children, wherefore they would have remained in a state of innocence, having no joy, for they knew no misery, doing no good, for they knew no sin." So that's talking about Adam and Eve and how we know that part of the plan was for us to have this opposition, right? To have pleasure and pain, to have comfort and discomfort, okay? So we know that. One of my favorite stories in the Book of Mormon is Alma and his conversion and the repentance process that he had to go through. For me, as someone who is constantly making mistakes, I really appreciate the compassion and the love that the Lord has for him. But I want to read a scripture about what he says when he was going through that spectrum of emotions and thoughts, okay? And I've always wondered about this particular verse, but this is what he says in Alma 36:20. He says, "And oh, what joy and what marvelous light I did behold. Yea, my soul was filled with joy, as exceeding as was my pain." Have you ever thought of that scripture? So he's talking about having his soul filled with joy, as exceeding as was his pain. He was experiencing two contrasting emotions at the same time. So another thing, so we've talked about kind of happiness and some of those myths. Another thing I want to talk about is just kind of our mind is wonderful. It does so many things. It has so many functions. One of the things I want to talk about is particularly what our mind's function is from a psychological perspective, okay? And maybe you already know this, but our mind's job, main purpose from a psychological perspective, is to protect us and to keep us safe and comfortable. That's awesome, right? I kind of think, thank you, mind, for doing that for me, okay? But that's the main purpose of the mind. And so as a result of that, though, sometimes our mind goes a little bit overboard and tries to protect us even a little bit more. So I want you to think of, do you have a friend in your life who maybe is just so kind and so helpful, or maybe it's a family member, so kind and so helpful, and they want to just help you so much, but sometimes they actually try too hard and maybe sometimes get in the way and become a nuisance. Does anyone have anyone like that in your life? I do, and I love that person, but sometimes that happens, and that's what can happen with our mind. Another way of thinking about it is that because our mind's wanting to protect us and keep us safe, it's always on guard. It's always hypervigilant. So I want you to think of this picture of our minds being kind of this radio of like doom and gloom. So the radio's playing and it's saying, watch out over there, or remember when that happened last time? You can't go do that again, or well, you made this mistake, so let's just stay safe and stay comfortable, or that's too risky, don't do that. That's kind of what our mind is like. It does wonderful things, but sometimes it gets in the way. So what do we do? Okay, talking about this rain, I love the imagery that she used of the rain. I'm going to talk about just some basic things that we can do. And again, following kind of with the theme, I think the Stake Relief Society president, Sister Demke, she talked about kind of starting where you are. As we go through these principles, I want you to think of, we're not going to do this perfectly. No one is. But we can start where we are and we can keep trying. Okay? So let's talk about this concept first of just being psychologically like flexible. When you think of flexibility, just in your mind, just notice what comes up. Okay? I'm going to read this definition, and it says psychological flexibility, the ability to be in the present moment with full awareness and openness to our experiences, and to take action guided by our values. So you notice there, that could require us to have that spectrum of thoughts and emotions, some contradictory thoughts and feelings. So we could be fully aware and open to what's going on in the present moment and in our experience, and sometimes that can be really happy or feel good for us, but other times that can not be a good thing and it can be really painful. But yet we're still taking action, what we do in our behaviors that reflect our values. That's what it means to kind of be psychologically flexible. That's what we're striving for, to help us cope and respond differently to that rain in our lives. So I want to show you some pictures. I love art of like nature. And I mean, I don't know, maybe you do too, but I love it when someone captures just how beautiful our earth is. And I love actually driving around here, parts of like Middle Tennessee, where you're driving and all of a sudden you're thinking, whoa, I'm up on this hill and I'm driving, and this is like a picture that should be in a magazine or in a picture. I love kind of sinking into the moment. So I want to show you some pictures. And when I do, I want you to think of what it means to be flexible, what it means to control what you can, and maybe be open to letting go of what you can't control. Okay, so I'm going to just show you some pictures. And for those of you who have daughters who went to girls' camp this summer, I have shared some of this with them. So if you want to chat with them, it'd be good. It'd be a good conversation starter. But some of your girls who are at camp, they saw some of this too. Okay, can you see that? Sorry. Okay, it's a tree. Look at that tree. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's the climate or the weather, but it looks pretty flexible, right? And it's holding on. It's doing what it can do, right? Think about that from our mind and in our lives. Okay, I like this tree. I noticed two things about this tree. Part of it looks like it maybe could be dying. I mean, I'm not an expert, but it could be dying. There's no leaves. But then the other part of it is completely flourishing. Look at the contrast of that, but it's still there, okay? Okay, I like this one the most. Have you ever seen anything like that? It's a massive tree, and then on the branch here, you've got this own little tree that decided to flourish. It's doing its own thing, right? It's controlling what it can. It's intentional in how it's in its purpose. Okay, this one's my favorite too. What do you think about that tree? It's got a lot going on, right? All around it, there's water, but what's it doing? I mean, it's flourishing the best that it can. Okay, so just some visuals there. Okay, so let's talk about some things. These are the 4 things I'm going to kind of focus on, and I'm going to do my best to just continue to go through the main points of these things. But the first thing we're going to talk about is, so we can be flexible to respond differently and to cope with the rain in our lives, is be more present. Contacting the present moment. Who here goes on autopilot most days? Whew. Moms, grandmas, aunts, women, professionals, everything, right? It's so easy to just go on autopilot and to just not even really be present, okay? And I don't say that in shaming at all. It's just, we can get caught up in that, all of us. But it's so key to try to be in the present moment. Okay, we're going to talk about opening up to thoughts and feelings, even those that are uncomfortable. Not because we like them, not because we deserve them, but just because we know that we're going to have those in that spectrum that we're supposed to experience. We're going to talk about our thoughts and watching them, because certain thoughts for each one of you and me really hook us and take us to places that we do not want to go. Okay? And then we're going to talk about do what matters, acting effectively, making sure that our behaviors reflect our values. Okay, so a couple things about what it means. Let's talk about being present. Okay, so being present, it's being in the here and now. And sometimes for us, that's really, really hard, because our mind takes us to, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, or you didn't do this good enough, or don't worry, or think about this, and we're not just in the present moment. So being in the present moment is consciously paying attention to what's going on in here and in our body, in the moment, okay? So for example, what's my mind telling me just right now? What's it saying to me? What's that radio doom and gloom saying to me? And then where do I feel that in my body? Well, when my mind says that to me, I feel sick to my stomach, or I feel really tense in my neck and shoulders. Who here holds all of their tension and anxiety in their neck and shoulders? Yes, let's all raise our hands. So it's being aware of your inner world and your outer world right in the moment. And it's developing an awareness of ourselves in the moment and an awareness of others and what's going on in our environment. Being in the present allows us to have this flexibility in our perspective and in our focus. So think of a stage show, okay? Who here likes the theater? Anyone like the theater? I want you to think of a stage show, and I want you to think of what does it look like on a stage show. So you've got the stage, right? And then you've got all these like spotlights, okay? If we're in the present, we have more flexibility where we can pan out and bring on all of those spotlights, and we could observe the whole stage. And sometimes in our life, we need to do that. We need to pan out and just look at our whole life and gain the whole perspective. And then sometimes we need to actually turn off all those spotlights and just put on one spotlight to maybe one thing that we need to tend to right then and there and focus on. But having that flexibility in the present moment is really helpful for us to cope and respond to that rain. Engaging, being in the present moment. I don't know about you, so my kids are still fairly little, and sometimes when I'm trying to be with them, I find it hard to stay with them and to be engaged in the moment of watching their little faces and their little bodies play and all the things that they say, and then my mind taking me to, oh, I've got to do this, or maybe I need to clean the house. The house is a disaster. You can't walk through the hallway. The dishes are piled up. It's hard sometimes, but if we can keep telling ourselves, back to the present moment, I want to enjoy this. So valuable for us. Savoring. Think about what it means to savor something. Thanksgiving is coming up. Think of your favorite dish, your favorite pie. Okay, I know that's what I'm thinking of. What does it feel like when you're savoring a bite of like that favorite dish or that slice of pie? You're thinking about it. You're tasting it. Right? You're noticing, what do you taste in it? You're trying to contact all aspects of that particular moment. So let's savor things in the present moment as much as we can. We can't just do this all 24 hours a day, okay? But we can take moments in our day to do that. Taking time to just pause and be silent and just observe and notice things. Have you ever been in like the grocery store and maybe you're in line and someone's in front of you and someone's in back of you? Have you ever just like observed the people that's like standing in front of you? I do. I think, oh, I wonder what that person's like. You know, you look at their clothes, maybe they got a cool haircut, or, ooh, I like those shoes, or whatever. But just taking time to just be in the present moment. And sometimes it can be a little silly, and other times it can be just really helpful for us to also invite the Spirit in our lives. So, a simple kind of formula, just to start from the beginning of trying to be in the present moment, is notice X. X can be anything. It can be notice my breathing. Notice what my mind is telling me right now. Notice what this comfortable blanket feels like that I have wrapped over me because it's getting colder in Tennessee. Notice what my child's face looks like right now when they're talking to me. Do they look older than they did yesterday? I don't know about any of you, but sometimes it happens to me. I look at my child and I think, oh my goodness, what happened? You look older than yesterday, right? So just start with noticing, okay? Why? Why should we do this? I think there's many reasons. We want to be fully engaged in the present moment. We don't want these moments to pass us by. And if you think about it, we really only have the present. We really only have some form of control in the present. We have our past and we can learn from it, but we can't change that. And the future we can influence, right? And we can increase our chances of things, but ultimately, probably all of us know from experience, we don't have 100% control over the future. So we want to spend the majority of our time in the present. Yes, there's going to be times when we need to go into the past and maybe heal and resolve some things, but then there's going to be times we need to go in the future and do our best in planning to try and increase those chances. But we want to spend the majority of our time in the present. Okay, a couple quotes from Elder Uchtdorf. So at the time when I've given this presentation 3 or 4 different times, different venues, different people, and at the time I was really listening to Elder Uchtdorf and like all of his talks. And I love him. I love all the general authorities, but I just love how he says things. It helps me to understand. But here's a quote from him, and this is from his talk, Forget Me Not. He says, "The happiest people I know are not those who find their golden ticket. They are those who, while in the pursuit of worthy goals, discover and treasure the beauty and sweetness of the everyday moments. They are the ones who, thread by thread, weave a tapestry of gratitude and wonder throughout their lives. These are they who are truly happy." Now, that doesn't mean that they only have happy days. It's just, along with the rain, they're finding and seeking ways to be in the present moment, to find those pieces of happiness, find those patches of sunlight. One more quote from Uchtdorf again. He says, "Brothers and sisters, no matter our circumstances, no matter our challenges or trials, there is something in each day to embrace and cherish. There is something in each day that can bring gratitude and joy if only we will see it and appreciate it." Okay. We're going to move on to opening up around thoughts and feelings. And this is a tricky one, you guys, because I'm just going to be honest. I don't want to open up to my thoughts and feelings sometimes. They scare me. They make me feel sad. They're hard. I think it was Elder Neil Anderson. He said that sometimes we can have things come into our life that takes our breath away. And sometimes our thoughts and emotions and things that come in our life can take our breath away. But we know that we're supposed to allow ourselves to open up around it. And remember, that does not mean we're supposed to like them or deserve them, but it's part of our process. It's part of our refinement. Okay, so let me go with, want to clarify, opening up around thoughts and feelings. This is what I'm talking about. Letting go of the struggle to have it or not have it. How many times do we expend so much energy saying, I shouldn't have that thought, I shouldn't have that feeling? Sometimes we will have thoughts or feelings that we don't want. Okay? That doesn't mean we are a bad person. It just means that's what our mind does. Our mind serves us up a whole bunch of thoughts throughout the day. I mean, think of all the thousands of thoughts and feelings you might have during the day. Just because one pops into our mind does not mean that's who we are or what we want. It just means that's what our brain is doing. Okay? So it's letting go of that struggle to have it or not have it. It's just giving it some space inside of you, just making some room for it. Not so it can stay forever, but so that it can leave you in its own time. And it will, right? Going back to the weather in Tennessee, how we're always fluctuating. Opening up is trying to learn from it, learn from our thoughts and feelings. What are they trying to tell me? Is there something that I need to do or something I need to change or something I need to tend to? Sometimes we need to breathe into it. I know that sounds silly, but sometimes we do. We need to breathe into this thought or feeling. It's so big. It can be really difficult. And all we can do is just try to breathe into it. And again, kind of what I said, allowing it to come and go in its own time. Because when we try to get rid of it sooner than it wants to, that actually makes it worse sometimes. Okay, I want to clarify what opening up is not. Opening up is not just passive acceptance, like we just accept whatever. We're opening up to thoughts and feelings when they are things that ultimately we can't control, that we need to open up to in order for us to better evaluate how do we want to respond? What can I do? What can I control? Opening up is not about condoning abusive or inappropriate behavior, okay? Opening up isn't forgetting about it, it's not getting rid of it, and especially it's not liking it or feeling comfortable with it or even deserving it sometimes, okay? So I want to be really clear about that. Let me see here, where else do I want to go? Okay, so sometimes we actually think that we can't control our thoughts and feelings. We can definitely influence them, absolutely. Okay, but sometimes, have you ever had an experience where you're experiencing something really happy and joyful, and then all of a sudden, boom, a thought pops into your head that's really sad or filled with anxiety? I don't know why that happens. I think that's part of what our brain does, but sometimes that can happen. So just some funny, silly exercises to kind of explain this point a little bit. We can definitely influence our thoughts, but we don't have that 100% control over what pops into our mind sometimes. So what I want you to do is just humor me and do a little silly kind of exercise. What I want you to do is in your mind, I want you to bring up how you got here today. Just kind of think about, how'd you get here today? Did you drive by yourself? Were you with someone else? Was it really stressful getting here today? Did you not want to come today? Or were you really excited to come today? So just kind of bring all those up in your mind. Okay. So you guys got it? Okay. Now I just want you to delete that memory and don't think about it again. How's it going? It's hard, right? Same thing. So when I work with teenagers, I tell them, hey, we're going to have a good session today, but here's one thing I do not want you to think about during our session, okay? So just whatever you talk about, do not think of this. And I say, I do not want you to think of a zebra. And they look at me like I'm crazy. I say, well, what's wrong? What are you thinking about? A zebra, right? Okay, how do we open up? What are some more specific ways? Observing our thoughts and feelings. Okay, so instead of maybe just being in here of, oh, my mind's telling me all these things, we can try to look at them in a different way. We can objectify them. So let's say I'm having a thought or feeling around anxiety, okay, or it can be depression. What does that feeling feel like in my body right now? And where do I feel it the most? Well, maybe I feel it in my stomach the most, okay? So what if that was an object, what would that object look like? Okay? And I've heard so many really creative things over the years. I've heard, this feeling is a circular metal ball that has spikes in it. And that's what it feels like whenever I have those thoughts of depression or anxiety. And we can ask ourselves, okay, well, what is it made of? What does that object look like? Is it hot or cold? Is it warm or cold? Is it moving or is it still? Okay, so if we can open up around thoughts or feelings and objectify them, it helps us just to create that space for them. Okay, here's another thing. So, who's seen this sign before? I know Gretchen has, right? Yeah. Anyone seen this sign before? Yes, okay. If you've been to England. Okay, funny story. My best friend and I decided we were going to, and this was a while ago because I can't imagine us doing it now, but we decided we were going to get these really big backpacks and we were going to go all over England and Italy. And we did. So we graduated from graduate school and we went. And I remember my friend's mom thinking, I have no control over my daughter doing this. Like, please don't do this. Like, bring someone with you. But we decided we were going to do it. So we get to London and we see, and in London, I mean, the way that you travel, is more efficiently is to use their subway, what do they call it? The tube? I think the tube. Okay. So we saw these signs like everywhere. And I'm so embarrassed that I didn't click. I'm like, what is that sign? Why do they keep saying that? And so finally we got the courage, and I feel really embarrassed, but we got the courage to ask someone as we're riding on the tube, like, what are all these signs about this? And the guy he was kind to us. He smiled because it was so obvious of what it was. But he said, well, when you get off of the train, there's a gap between the train and the platform. And this is telling you just to be careful of that gap so you don't fall and get hurt. So mind the gap, right? In order to open up with our thoughts and feelings of what we're going to have, one way to respond to that is to have some self-compassion for ourselves. Mind the gap. And what that gap is it's a reality gap. It's based on what we want versus what we have in that moment. And it's that gap that can often bring us those thoughts and feelings that are really painful or really uncomfortable. So minding that gap and applying self-compassion, that we're doing the best that we can, that we've got the Lord on our side, and that we can control what we can control to help ourselves in the best way that we can. So minding that gap. All right. I'm going to kind of move forward here. Okay, let's talk about watching our thoughts. Okay, I got a picture of a hook here. Who here has thoughts sometimes that really dominate like our day, that start to affect us and really affect our behaviors? Anyone have thoughts like that maybe? I know I do sometimes. Maybe it's a thought that maybe I'm not doing enough or I'm not good enough or whatever, but it can feel like we're hooked to something. And when we're hooked, we're being jerked around, right? And we're not focusing on what we want to focus on. So when we do that, this is kind of what it's like. It's kind of like we're going throughout our day, throughout our life, with their hands just completely over our head. And we really can't see, but like everything in front of us is what matters to us, what we want to do, how we want to be, how we want to treat ourselves, the people that we love and care about, that we want to engage in. And if we're hooked with a thought, sometimes it can be so controlling that we're here. And we're not here engaging in all those things over there that are important to us, or things that we need to work on, or even our daily tasks, things to make our life work. And we're just here. So we want to kind of bring those, unhook a little bit and bring that down when we can. And even just a little bit can help us, okay? So what we want to do, or some things that can help, and again, starting where you are, is we first notice what the thought is. What is my mind telling me right now? We can name it. And I always encourage everyone that I work with, name it in a non-judgmental way. I'm having anxiety right now, or I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough right now, or I'm having the thought that something bad is going to happen. Okay? There's no judgment around it. There's no, you shouldn't have that feeling, or you should have that feeling. It's just, you're just naming it for what it is. Okay? A lot of times we have thoughts that kind of come in clusters and that have certain themes in our lives. Like the I'm not good enough story, that's a really powerful one. I don't know, I'm assuming that at some point some of us have had those thoughts. Again, kind of what I mentioned, the something bad is going to happen is also kind of, really strong theme of what our mind presents to us. Sometimes just kind of naming that theme is really helpful for us to kind of neutralize that thought, to name it for just what it is, to neutralize it and take the power out of that thought. So think of just kind of unhooking from that thought, trying to get out of the focus of it in your mind and observing it. What's this thought? What's it telling me? There are some things with some of those thoughts that we can pay attention to. Sometimes we have some of those thoughts and we can't take useful information from them, right? So some of those thoughts can be about, what's this thought trying to tell me? What can I learn from this thought? But the rest of it, I want you to think of, instead of being here, just setting it down on your lap. Okay, it's still there, right? It's still there. You're aware of it, but take what's useful from it, if anything. Sometimes there's nothing useful in it, but take what's useful from it, and then ask yourself, how do I want to stand? What do I want to stand for in the face of this feeling or thought right now? Because being completely hooked is not taking me where I want to go, okay? So talking about kind of this hook and this game that we can sometimes play with the thoughts that are in our mind. Anyone here play chess? Yeah, kind of, some. I know, I've always wanted to learn. I have to be honest, it intimidates me. I feel like it's really complex and hard. I don't know. My 10-year-old son, he's learned how to do it, and he loves it. And he asked me to play, and I kind of think, I don't even know how to play. But I find it fascinating. So I want you to think of this chessboard right here. And think of this idea of that we get hooked in this game with our thoughts. So see on this chessboard right here, we've got some dark pieces, right? Those are kind of like all those like really powerful thoughts that jerk us around, kind of like those negative thoughts, right? And then the other side, you've got the white pieces. Those are kind of like, I'm awesome, I can do this, Those are all those thoughts, right? And so what we often do is we play this game where, let's say one black piece goes out, well, we're going to replace it with a white piece, right? And that's okay. I think we have good intentions, and there's a time and a place for that. But sometimes we get so caught up in the game. But here's the problem. In this game of chess, there's a limited number of pieces, right? But the thoughts in our mind, we have unlimited number of those black and white pieces. And so the game can never really be won. Things are always moving. And here's the other thing, is the white pieces actually attract the black pieces, and the black pieces attract the white pieces. So who here has ever said something like, I can accept myself, and then a thought pops in, no, you can't. What about this, or this? Or I'm a really good friend. I am. And then your mind says, well, what about the time you flaked on your friend, or, you haven't seen him for like a month? That's not a very good friend. So do you see how that game continues to happen? So this idea of unhooking from thoughts that are not helpful from us, what if we were more like the board in this game? Think about that. What if we were more like the board? So we still have intimate contact with all the pieces. We know they're there. We're acknowledging them, right? And we've made space for them, right? We've opened up to them. They're there. But we're not hooked in this game. So we're noticing all the things that are going on, but we're holding on to the things that are useful for us, that take us to where we want to go, instead of trying to mix and match and win this game. Okay. All right, next one here. Last one. We're going to talk about, what does it mean to live intentionally in terms of doing what matters? What does that mean? I think it can mean a lot of things, but in this context, I want to talk about values. Okay? Okay. In this context, intentional living is all about the values. Not that goals are not good. Please don't misunderstand me. But look at the difference between a value and a goal. Can you guys kind of see that? Hopefully? Okay. We need goals as stepping stones to live our values, right? But sometimes if we hold only to goals, that can be really hard because we're always needing the next thing. We're never satisfied, right? Because there's a beginning and an end, always to a goal. Okay, so they're important, but we want to use them to focus ultimately on living the values. So the values are the overall guide to the direction that we want to move in life. Okay? And the goals are kind of like those stopping points. So if the value, here's an example it says on here, if the value is traveling west, a goal would be stopping at those cities while traveling west. Okay? So values can usually be described in like one or two words. Okay? So like, for example, caring, compassionate, honest, loyal. You guys can probably name so many values just within our faith, for those of you, who are members of the church, or even just Christians in general. Most of you can identify really probably easily like what those values around your spirituality and faith are, right? But think of the values that you have about who you want to be as a person, how you want to treat yourself, how you want to treat others. What do you want to stand for in this life? Okay, that helps us to kind of start to bring up what are those words that describe the values that we want to live. So kind of an activity sometimes that I will have people do is maybe this is, and I don't intentionally, I'm not intentionally trying to be morbid here, but sometimes I will say, okay, let's pretend that you're watching a video. Oh, we're almost done. You're watching a video of your funeral, and someone that you love deeply and care about deeply is speaking at your funeral. What would you hope that they said about you? What would you hope that they said how you treated them and others? As you reflect on those questions, those values, those words are going to pop up. And it's going to be different kind of for all of us. We all are kind of different in what we truly kind of value. But we want to have our values guiding our behaviors, even when we're dealing with rain. Okay? So I kind of want to read one final scripture here. And this is in 2 Nephi 2:26. But this scripture talks about acting and not being acted upon. Okay? It says, "And the Messiah cometh in the fullness of time, that he may redeem the children of men from the fall. And because that they are redeemed from the fall, they have become free forever, knowing good from evil, to act for themselves, and not to be acted upon, save it be by the punishment of the law at the great and last day, according to the commandments which God hath given." I love that part. To act for themselves and not to be acted upon. I am completely conceding that sometimes and some days that is really hard for us to do, and we're not going to be perfect. And some days we are going to be acted upon by our thoughts and feelings. But let's try to have some days where we're acting. Our thoughts and feelings, if they're, not helpful for us, we're not letting them act for us. We're feeling them, they're there, but we're making a choice to act according to our values, despite the rain that we have going on. And I can't tell you, the keynote speaker, she's a perfect example of that, just her sharing, the specifics around her life. She was going through intense storms, right? And yet she's still doing things that matter to her. She's still treating others how she wants to treat them. So I'm going to kind of skip one slide here. Whoops, sorry. Okay, I'm sure you have heard this quote a ton. So I'm sorry if maybe this is triggering for you, okay? I want to just really honor that because I know sometimes that can be triggering. But it really reflects these principles. President Nelson, my dear brothers and sisters, the joy we feel has little to do with the circumstances of our lives and everything to do with the focus of our lives. So that focus is about, the circumstances is about all our thoughts and feelings, what's going on, what life has thrown at us, okay? And then the focus is, what are we standing for in the face of that, even though it can be really difficult and sometimes we fail. But I believe that maybe that's part of what he's talking about. And consider the source. What we know about President Nelson and the trials that he has been through, that he has been open and shared with us, and yet he can still say something like that. That's something we can learn from. That's something we can strive to be. We're not going to be like a prophet, but we can strive to follow his counsel as best as we can and to start where we are. So I want to just bear my testimony, sisters, that I know that the Lord loves us and he expects us just to start where we are. He does not expect perfection. But these are some of the principles that through his atonement and his enabling power that we can use and take with us to help us to open up and be present and respond and cope better with the rain in our lives, and to do what matters to us, what's important to us, despite what life may be throwing at us. I know these things are true, and I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.